All right. So it is officially Catherine's Corner takeover. Obviously, I am not Catherine. I am Rebecca Del Secco. I am the COO here at Civility Partners. Going on, gosh, I've been here almost a decade and I've done everything and anything here at Civility Partners, and except for this, obviously. So first time LinkedIn Live and taking over Catherine's Corner. So it'll be fun. And so I'm here with Dr. Bob Berk. And we are going to talk about conflict at work, conflict mediation, and sort of all of the things that go along with that. So I'll let Dr. Bob, as I call him, introduce himself, and then we'll just dive right in with the conversation.
Well, Rebecca, since we're talking about conflict, I just want to know, was it a hostile takeover or was it like a friendly thing?
It was friendly. It was friendly. No hostility over here at Civility.
All right, very good. Good morning, everybody. My name is Bob, like Rebecca said, and it's really an honor to be here, even if Catherine isn't here. I am a longtime educator, spent a long time as a school principal, love that work, and then transitioned about 6 or 7 years ago to working with organizations. I mostly kind of show up in organizations when there's some type of conflict, although not exclusively, and sometimes that work involves mediation. And I'm pretty darn happy and excited to be here to talk about what that looks like and how organizations can benefit by kind of expanding their scope of ideas on how they can work with conflict in the workplace.
Yes. And we're excited to have you and for you to share your expertise. So just to kick us off, for those who aren't familiar, what exactly is workplace mediation and what is not workplace mediation?
Sure. Okay, well, with me, you're never going to get a dictionary definition, right? You're going to get a story or something a little bit more amorphous. But I'll tell you my sense of how workplace mediation shows up is, one, it's not a legal process. In fact, in many states, including California, if you actually come to an agreement in mediation, both parties actually have to sign something if they want that agreement to be admissible in court. So there's this presumption that mediation takes place outside of a legal system. Also, that mediation, in some ways, although HR often will arrange it, mediation is typically outside of an HR process. In other words, a mediation agreement oftentimes does not go in an employee file. It's not looked at as punitive. What mediation is looked at is, we really appreciate these two employees or this group of employees. We want to invest in them so their workplace experience is better on a day-to-day basis. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the word mediation, Rebecca, feels like off-putting. This, like people like, no, we don't want that. And so I'll often kind of reframe it and be like, well, mediation is just a discussion that I facilitate. Mm-hmm. And the difference between just a discussion is the goal of mediation is to get to a place where we have very clear agreements about what we're committing to from a behavior perspective moving forward.
Yeah, I know a lot of, we get those calls and wow, mediation feels really serious. I don't know if we're there yet. And that's really not the case. The goal is to move forward in a productive way so that, people are thriving and doing their best at work. And I know too, that doesn't necessarily have to be only between two people, right?
Right. Sometimes we'll do group mediations. Sometimes people come in and they say, hey, I think this is going on. What do you think we should do? And this because we work together. But oftentimes the answer back is, well, we don't really know until we have a chance to listen to people. So we'll listen. We sometimes call that discovery, and then we'll make recommendations. Okay, like these two people could use a conversation, and these two, and then after that, like let's get the group together. And sometimes it's just like, hey, these two people need it. Mm-hmm. And I think what's so important around mediation is that you can use it even in cases where there's a difference of power and a hierarchy. It's not only lateral. And people are nervous about it, but most of the time in a conversation that we might have where we'll say, hey, the HR person will say, I don't think our employees will do this. And we'll say, well, why don't we just set up a conversation where I have a chance to talk to them? And by the end of the conversation, 97% of the time, people are like, okay, like, let's do this. I want to stay in this organization. I want this relationship to be better. I'm really nervous about it. and I'm also going to commit to trying.
Yeah. And do you feel like in that discovery, people tend to be forthcoming with how they're feeling, or do you find it's difficult to do that discovery piece?
I think that people are forthcoming. I don't. I think they're primed, right? They know that somebody is sitting down as an investment in them, ready to listen to them, and they want to share. Most of the time, people want to share because they want to make life better for themselves and their colleagues. Sometimes people want to share because they want to stick it to another person, right?
Mm,
And so that's part of the discovery process. I mean, if somebody is only interested, and this is such a small minority of cases, but if somebody's only interested in kind of shoving that needle in, then we might suggest something different than mediation.
yeah.
But if there's a glimmer of, yeah, we used to have a relationship, or we could have a relationship, or I really don't want to do this work, but I know it's important and I'll do it for my other colleagues,
Yeah.
then there's a path forward.
Yeah, I think generally people, they want to help and they want to be helpful. And I ask that, we do other forms of discovery at Civility Partners and surveys or interviews or focus groups. And sometimes clients reach out to us and are nervous about us coming in, or thinking, hey, people are pretty cautious. I'm not sure that, what you will get out of the interviews. And then I call it the power of the third party. There's something about it, bringing in an expert and prompting it the correct way, right? Just like you said, priming them so that they know it's not to be punished, something that you're going to punish for or anything, and that you're really here to move forward. And people they generally do want to be helpful, is
Yeah.
what I found.
I think that is so true. And sometimes in the moment, it's hard to believe, right, that that person's just out there to get something, and
Yeah.
actually find different. Like, most people do not want to walk into their workplace every day with a stomach ache.
Yeah.
And so why not try it?
Yeah.
Especially when, like, it's not HR, it's not legal.
Mhm.
Like what's, and I don't think we can, in this role, say that there's no risk. Of course, there's a risk for engaging in something new. It's just that it's a calculated risk that oftentimes pays off with huge reward.
Yeah. 100%. And so when you're brought into a situation for whatever reason, what's usually already happened? Like what's already unfolded typically? And I know every scenario is probably, a little bit different, but what are some commonalities in terms of what you see when you're brought in?
Right, right. So you're right. I mean, there's all sorts of different things, but I would say in the majority of cases, here's what's happened. The manager will say, I sat down with person A, like we spoke about it, like we made a plan. I sat down with person B, like we spoke about it, we made a plan. I went back to person A. Like, I've had so many conversations with these people, and we keep trying, and I keep trying to solve things, and we're still in the same place. And here's how I feel about that. One, like, all the honor to you for sitting down and having the harder conversations with people to try to figure out how to solve problems. And two, nobody ever solved problems by keeping people in two separate rooms and never bringing them together in the workplace. Like some types of mediation, we do that, right? Where they're just in two separate rooms, we never meet. But in the workplace, I find that it's really not an effective method. And yet most supervisors, that's what we do. Because of course we haven't been taught the skill sets or developed the skill set on how do we facilitate a conversation when all of the parties with power over this dynamic are in the room. And so I would say most of the time people come in and say it's not working. And the reason is it's not working is because you keep having conversations with people in isolation.
Okay.
So it's great that people are engaged in the conversations. A lot of managers won't even do that. And from my perspective is I actually think a lot of managers could bring people together in a successful way. It's just like, how do we teach managers that skill set? So that's kind of one typical case that people will bring to us and be like, this is what we've done. Sometimes people will be like, we haven't done anything, but we got a written complaint and we're really scared of legal. So, like, what can you do? And that's also a pretty frequent kind of stepping in point where somebody made a complaint. And I think this is the place, Rebecca, where like you and I are always careful. Like if there are instances of harassment or bullying or and and sometimes that's hard to tease out without, doing an investigation. But the last thing I would want to do is take somebody who feels like they've been bullied or harassed and
Mm,
say, let's sit down in a room together for 3 hours. So sometimes we have to tease out if mediation really is the right piece, or if it's not. And of course, there's a legal definition of bullying and harassment. I'm not an attorney. Don't ask me that, although I could come close. But sometimes somebody feels bullied, and an attorney will say, "Well, that's not bullying." They'll say, "Okay, but I feel it. So why are you
mhm.
making me sit down with this person?"
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. I think that, the definitions, harassment and bullying in the workplace, again, I'm not a lawyer either. We're in this space is that it often doesn't a complaint doesn't often rise to the point of being in that illegal territory, but it is very harmful, right? The experience or the behaviors that are happening. And not only in that, let's say it's two people that, one feels bullied, or maybe they both feel bullied by each other, it's feeding out into the work environment as well. And so it's so important that even if you reach out to legal, or HR runs an investigation, and maybe nothing's founded, that you still are going in there and trying to solve whatever is happening. And and also it can escalate very quickly. It could go into that arena very quickly, at least in our experience. And so it's interesting too, the difference of the sort of the managers that are really working to, they know it's a problem, they're going individually, versus sort of those individuals who kind of wait for that trigger. I'm curious, which do you see more often?
Most managers try to engage in the, I'm going to talk to this person, I'm going to talk to this person. And then they throw up their hands because it's not working.
Mhm.
And I think it's not working because it's just not necessarily an effective way to mediate conflict.
Mhm.
When it is an effective way, when you see a dynamic where one person is clearly at fault, well, I'll just use that generic term, and it's not really an issue between two people, it's an issue of, hey, this person is showing up in the workplace in a way that isn't working, the way they communicate, the way they do this. And so then managers can really work with people to set expectations around behavior, to coach them on behavior change, those sorts of
Yeah.
pieces. So that one-on-one really is effective. And when managers do that, they see change. It's just that when the issues are not so clear cut, where, oh, it's not Rebecca, it's kind of the
Mhm.
both, and how they show up, then it's different. Can we rewind 4 minutes, Rebecca? Because I think you said something really important
Yeah,
around
go for it.
um, how sometimes when there's kind of workplace conflict between two parties, I think your words were kind of, it feeds out into the rest of the
Mhm.
organization. And I think this is something that a lot of organizations um, understand less when they come to us. Like, they will say, hey, we need to do something about these two people.
Mhm.
And one of the questions that we always ask them is, okay, well, what about the rest of the team that's really aware of this dynamic? And of course, like, there's confidentiality in the workplaces, as there should be. And
Mhm.
also, people are curious by nature, how do you engage in the rest of the team when harm done has been done throughout the team, when at the same time you're kind of engaging maybe in a more private or confidential mediation between two people?
Mhm.
And this is um, these sorts of things that sometimes connect would be doing listening circles or restorative circles, where the team has an opportunity to really talk about what the impact from
Mhm.
this other situation has been on them, and then to kind of transition into, hey, like, what do we need in the future?
Yeah.
And I think I see those as really paying attention to the secondary kind of rollover, or the feeding out, like you said, in a way that really respects the entire team.
Yeah. And what are some of the impacts that you've seen on that outer layer, so to speak, of
Yeah.
individuals?
So, I mean, I think the first thing we see is people just stop communicating.
Okay.
Why do they stop communicating? Because they stop caring. Like, it's not worth it. It's not worth it to me to do this when, like, because what those people are doing is impacting the team. And so what we see is like people show up to do their job as they define it, meaning like the individual components of the job that don't relate to the team. Well, no team was their best when everybody showed up as individuals. So I think like we see that as the biggest kind of flag when two people on a team are in conflict, the other people just show up kind of in isolation, or they show up in a way where kind of where there's cliques formed, where these people are like, hey, we're the good people, or we're the people not involved in that conflict, so we're doing this. But it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And I think what winds up happening is the company winds up searching for solutions that revolve around the conflict. Oh, because this is going on with this conflict, let's assign these tasks to this person. And so you wind up with an org chart, or if not an org chart, kind of a duty chart of what people are doing that actually doesn't make sense organizationally. You create it based on the interpersonal dynamics. And that's not efficient, nor is it fun or enjoyable.
No, not at all. I had a thought in my head and then it completely jumped out of my brain. I was going to ask about, I think when we're talking, you mentioned cliques is gossip is, a huge, has a huge negative impact on organizational culture. And we always talk about, we're civility partners about addressing behaviors before they escalate into the bullying and harassment arena. And one of the things that is just, a killer is gossip. And so I think that conflict also lends itself to that gossiping, like you said, and the cliques that, so-and-so is they're talking together about how they feel about the conflict, or these people are on maybe this person's side or whatnot. And gossip really has, a major impact on relationships and on organizational culture.
It sure does. But actually, I don't have any issues with gossip. I just go into an organization and I say, no more gossiping, and people stop right away.
And people just stop.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's sort of similar to when leaders walk in and they say, this is a safe place. Really? How'd that happen? Yesterday it felt unsafe. No more gossip? Really? How's that going to happen? And I think it's best of intentions when we do these things. They just don't work. And so for me, I think, let's take the example of gossip. There's very few people in this world who would say gossip is a respectful behavior. And I love to spend a lot of time when we talk about building culture, changing culture. I think it's really important that we understand how each of us as individuals define respect, and not a team definition of respect. Like the team can agree on a definition of respect, but if you, Rebecca, have a totally different definition of respect, and I'm trying to respect you by living up to the team definition of respect, it's not going to work. And so I think that the approach to gossip is actually like, let's start by defining, what does respect look like in the workplace? What is respectful communication in the workplace? Let's engage in those conversations of like when we as a team have done really well and when we've fallen short. And then the question is, how do we hold ourselves accountable to the agreements we just made around what's respectful communication or respectful behavior? And this is, I think, another piece that comes out of the mediation world in the workplace also, is like, how do we hold ourselves accountable to agreements we just made? And how do managers hold people accountable? And I think to circle back to the mediation piece is, when we do a workplace mediation, we're going to walk out of it with a clear list of things that people agreed to. And then we're going to sit down with the supervisors and say, okay, because we agreed in advance that the process of the mediation is confidential, I'm not going to share the process and the specifics. We also agreed in advance that the written outcome from the mediation is not confidential, and that I was going to share it with you as their supervisor so that you can hold people accountable to kind of what that looks like, to the agreement. And this feels incredibly important. Can I share a story about a mediation I did in a workplace about a year and a half ago?
Absolutely.
So I got called to come into a school where a teacher and somebody, I can't remember her exact title, but sort of like director of curriculum and instruction. So an indirect supervisor, like dotted line type thing. And this teacher and this supervisor, they could not get along. They had been really good friends. In fact, the teacher had looked up to this supervisor in some ways like a maternal figure, and they had really been close. And for whatever the reasons were, wasn't going well. So I flew to the city, went to the school, and they were both so nervous, but both, like, in their heart of hearts, wanted to do this, and were incredibly nervous that it was going to devolve into a bunch of yelling. We got an offsite office that wasn't in the school, and we sat down, and there was definitely a lot of emotion. And at one point, one of them looked at me and was like, "See, this is exactly it. I told you." And we worked through it, and we continue to push through it. And at the end of it, like, we had this agreement, and they were making eye contact. There was so much goodness, and they both kind of looked at each other at the same time. It was at that point, like around 1 p.m. They're like, "Let's play hooky from the afternoon at school, and let's go get lunch together." And I was like, "I'm charging the school double," like, because it worked so well. So this is sort of a good news, bad news story. The good news was the mediation was phenomenal. I think I play a little part in that, but I think they really showed up, like, primed to do great work. Well, by the end of the year, so 6-7 months later, they were back in a place that was kind of not working and not effective for either one. And so the question is, why? And the answer is, their supervisor didn't ever take the scheduled and proactive time to hold the two accountable to the agreement. And I think what would have been important, and we spoke about this, but of course, like, time is hard, and people struggle to schedule all the things that are important, especially in schools. And I think the supervisor wasn't able to really hold them accountable to the agreement and step in on a regular basis to discuss how things are, to ask for vulnerability, and to do some tune-ups. And I think what this has led to, Rebecca, like in our work, is that now when we go to the workplace and we do workplace mediations, we're always suggesting, okay, a couple additional things. Like, let's include a couple sessions with the manager so that we can help the manager hold people accountable. And then we also schedule kind of a group meeting, the manager and the two participants in the mediation, a couple weeks after the mediation, just to ensure that touch points around tune-ups are actually scheduled in. Because when we do that, when we include that, and we really support the managers in holding people accountable to the agreement they created, the success rate just skyrockets.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing and everything that you shared, the story and previously, is just intention is so important. Being intentional about what you do want to see versus this being sort of a blip in time. I think in the work that we do in Civility Partners and is very reactive, right? It reaches a certain point. And so great example is people reach out to us for training when there's high conflict environment. They want training on, conflict mediation. And we say, well, what are you going to do after the training, right? We can come and do a 2-hour training. And if the organizational systems don't support the learning, or, leadership isn't going to hold them accountable for what's being learned, then people will come out of that training and probably be thinking, well, that was really great, because we're amazing trainers, of course. We're the best. That was really great, but I don't think I can use any of what I learned here, or, we all feel really good now. Let's wait for the other shoe to drop, or whatever the case may be. And I think that applies to a lot of, I think that clearly applies to mediation, right? I think there's that discovery piece. There's that mediation that's sitting in that room and hammering out the problems and coming through that point of agreement for moving forward. And also, we're humans and we're not perfect. And that accountability piece has to be built in, because, and that's what we often see missing in organizations, is that sort of that next steps, right? Is here, we're coming in this high conflict scenario, we're going to make some really big strides up front, and it has to continue on. And even when we're gone, right? When you leave that room and when we, come out of organizations.
Right. And I think there's this piece where there are very few organizations that budget for mediation. It's just that it becomes this urgency, and then they find the money. And then the next piece is, okay, well, if you're finding money for us to come like 6 days from now and engage, can you find money for the next 6 months also? Because that's culture changing.
Agreed. So on the flip side of this is what does healthy conflict actually look like? And I'll say, in general, conflict is a good thing. It creates innovation. If people are challenging ideas, conflict, is a good thing, but it has to be sort of productive conflict or healthy conflict. And so what does that look like, Bob?
Yeah. So I have tried for the last few years to kind of differentiate, and it's not working, I'll be honest. But when people think the word conflict, it's hard to get people to think of the word healthy in front of conflict. Even though they've heard that term, it's hard to get them to buy into it. And so I keep trying to get people to use the word tension instead. Because I'm hoping people will engage better with it, and I think it's our job in workplaces to engage with tension in the workplace. And what it looks like is figuring out, how do I say something that somebody else or the team really needs to hear in a way that's about growth and not about blame. And the only way to say that in that way is to have group agreements ahead of time where we agree that this is the type of workplace that we want to have.
Okay.
So it means we've agreed that part of your responsibility, Rebecca, is to help me grow. And I've agreed the same with you. And then we put in place structures to build the muscle memory so that when we have to engage in these sorts of tension, we have the ability to do it. And so I always think, like, workplaces will often say, yes, like, let's engage with this conflict, or let's engage with it. And sometimes that happens when there's ideas about a technical part of the work. Oh, we should do it this way. No, we should do it this way. A lot of teams are pretty good at this, right? But teams are less good when it's less of a theoretical discussion, or even like tangible on the operation side, but more of like, you dropped the ball and we got to talk about this. And so to me, it's like, how do we get to this place where engaging in these conversations where what I say is taken as about being shared just for the betterment. I know we're short on time. One really quick story.
I was going to say, go.
Yeah, we worked with a group, and it was a really large nonprofit. And there was a senior leader who supervised a mid-level leader, and they trusted each other. Like, if you ask either one, oh, I trust them so much, all these sorts of things. Fantastic. So we were talking about, well, what does a one-on-one look like? And, I feel like in a one-on-one, there should be bi-directional feedback every time, because it makes both people better. And so the supervisee wrote, because as part of this process, hey, when you send emails with all caps, people feel like you're yelling at them. Remember, and this has been going on for like a year, these all caps emails. The intent was not to yell. These people stated emphatically that they trusted each other so much. And yet there was this fear to give this little piece of feedback. So finally, when the supervisee gave it to the supervisor, she's like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. I'm so grateful. Well, how come two people who have so much trust needed me to come in and give them that process? And this is, I think, like, we need to build the muscle memory, which means like systems, format, structures on how we give feedback, and then we can engage in it more, spontaneously.
Yeah. It's about what the organizational culture reinforces and how people handle conflict, when they handle it, and not conflict, I'll say tensions. When there's tensions or feedback, it's hard. I think it can be difficult. And so it has to be part of sort of how things are around here, is how we describe culture. It is how things are around here, that we speak up, when maybe something is coming off in a way that's, not productive, or it seems shouty. And emails can just be, they can just be so misinterpreted or interpreted this way. And so I love that story. And it all boils down to the culture and what the culture really dictates.
Rebecca, thank you for this
Yes.
invitation to take over Catherine's Corner. I'm sorry I have to run to another appointment, but I'm so grateful to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me and letting me step in here. Jenny is in the chat and she is providing the SHRM activity and HRCI code for anyone who's interested. And yeah, thank you all and have a great rest of your day.
Bye, Rebecca. Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.